What would you do if your new neighbor greeted you with a stack of fines instead of a welcome basket? When my wife Sarah and I finally bought our first home, we thought we had escaped the chaos of city living. The house was perfect, a charming two-story with a wide front porch, nestled in a quiet neighborhood lined with towering oak trees. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes after school and elderly couples watered their flower beds in the early mornings. It felt safe, peaceful, like the fresh start we had been dreaming of. We had barely finished unpacking when we met her. She arrived unannounced, standing at the edge of our yard as if inspecting a piece of land she already owned. She was in her early 50s, with meticulously styled blonde hair, bold red lipstick, and an air of self-importance that was impossible to ignore. A tailored red blazer clung to her shoulders, and in her manicured hands was a thick stack of paperwork. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over us like a principal about to reprimand two unruly students. "Hello," she said, clearing her throat as if preparing for a grand speech. "I'm Karen, the president of this community's homeowners association. I assume the previous owner informed you that HOA membership is mandatory?" I glanced at Sarah, then back at Karen. I had done my research before buying this house. Nowhere in the contract did it say that HOA membership was required. "Thanks, but we won't be joining," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. Karen's smile faltered, and for a split second, her expression hardened. "Oh, I think you misunderstood," she said, her tone dripping with forced patience. "The HOA isn't optional. You're required to sign these papers. Today." She extended the documents, her fingers twitching as if she couldn't wait to see my signature on the dotted line. I didn't take them. Instead, I crossed my arms and met her stare head-on. "I understand just fine." And the answer is still no. A tense silence stretched between us. Then, Karen's smile vanished. Her fingers curled around the stack of papers, gripping them so tightly the edges crumpled. "You're making a big mistake," she said flatly. Sarah shifted uneasily beside me, but I stood my ground. "I guess we'll find out." Karen let out a sharp exhale, turned on her heel, and stalked off without another word. But as she disappeared down the sidewalk, I had the unsettling feeling that this wasn't over. And I was right. Because Karen didn't take rejection well. And she was about to make our lives a living hell. The first letter arrived the next morning. Sarah found it tucked under our front door, printed on thick, glossy paper with the official HOA logo stamped at the top. The wording was formal, almost legalistic, but the message was clear. "Your grass exceeds the HOA mandated limit of 3 inches. Please rectify this violation within 24 hours to avoid penalties." I frowned, stepping outside to inspect our lawn. The grass barely brushed the tops of my shoes, it was perfectly trimmed. I tossed the letter aside, assuming it was some kind of clerical mistake. Then, the emails started. Every morning, my inbox was flooded with absurd violation notices. "Your trash bin is not aligned correctly with the curb. Reposition it immediately. Your front door color does not match the approved HOA palette. You must repaint it or face a fine. Your car is parked incorrectly in your own driveway. If not moved within 24 hours, it will be towed." I laughed at first, but as the days passed, the sheer relentlessness of it all began to wear on me. I knew exactly what was happening. Karen was making good on her promise to make my life miserable. Then came the fines. A thick envelope arrived in the mail, demanding $500 for my non-compliant door color. I gritted my teeth. I hadn't painted a damn thing. The door was the exact shade it had been when we bought the house. I tossed the letter onto the coffee table, shaking my head. She's trying to bully us into giving in. Sarah, sitting across from me, sighed and rubbed her temples. Can she even do this? We never signed up for the HOA. Doesn't matter to her. I muttered, running a hand through my hair. She thinks she owns this neighborhood. Karen wasn't just content with burying us under paperwork, she wanted to humiliate me. One morning, I found my name plastered all over the HOA bulletin board near the community entrance. A printed notice warned other residents about a non-compliant homeowner who refuses to follow community standards. A photo of my house was posted underneath. I stared at the notice in disbelief. This wasn't just petty, this was an outright public shaming campaign. And the worst part? It worked. Neighbors who once waved at me started avoiding eye contact. A man who had previously introduced himself as friendly and welcoming suddenly refused to acknowledge me at the mailbox. People whispered when Sarah walked past, their eyes darting toward our house with thinly veiled judgment. Karen was winning. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants in my front yard, a shadow loomed over me. I turned and found Karen standing there, dressed in an impeccably tailored black blazer, her lips curled into an infuriatingly smug smirk. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She simply walked onto my property like she had every right to be there. "Mr. Ethan," she said sweetly, but there was venom in her voice. "I think it's time you realized that no one defies the HOA and wins." I took a slow breath, setting down the hose. "I don't recall ever signing away my rights to you, Karen." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "The HOA is the law in this neighborhood," she said, tilting her head as if speaking to a misbehaving child. "And if you refuse to comply, well, let's just say that consequences are inevitable." I stared at her, anger curling hot in my chest. I had played nice. I had ignored her nonsense. But I wasn't going to let some power-hungry dictator control my life. "You should focus on enforcing actual laws," I said flatly, "instead of making up your own." Karen's fake smile disappeared instantly. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I promise you will." And then, just like that, she turned and marched away. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, watching her retreating figure. "Ethan. I really don't like this," she murmured, worry evident in her voice. "Neither do I admitted. But I won't let her bully us." I meant it. But what I didn't know was that Karen had just begun. And she was about to take things to a whole new level. There was never a good feeling when the station phone rang in the middle of the night. The sharp trill sliced through the quiet hum of paperwork and idle chatter, making every firefighter in the room stiffen. My colleague, Ryan, grabbed the receiver, his face serious as he listened. A few seconds later, he shot me a glance, his expression shifting into something that sent ice through my veins. I barely heard the words as he relayed them. "House fire. Our neighborhood." I was already on my feet before he finished. Within seconds, we were in the truck, the blaring sirens ripping through the silent night as we tore through the streets. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The bitter taste of fear burned in my throat. The fire was close to my house, too close, and my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Sarah. Was she safe? Had she gotten out? The first flickers of orange appeared on the horizon, growing larger as we sped toward the source. Flames devoured the night sky, thick black smoke billowing upward like a warning signal from hell. I could already tell this was bad. Really bad. And then, she stepped into the road. Karen. I barely had time to react before I slammed the brakes, the fire truck skidding to a stop just inches from her. She stood there like she owned the damn street, arms folded, eyes gleaming with that same power-hungry arrogance I had come to despise. The fire was raging behind her, just a few houses away. I could hear the distant, panicked shouts of neighbors, see the flickering light reflecting off their horrified faces. Every second counted. And Karen? She didn't move. Instead, she smirked. smirked. "Turn around," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteous authority. "You are disturbing the peace of this neighborhood." I could hardly process what I was hearing. "Karen, move. Now. There's a fire." "There is no fire," she snapped. "I know what you're trying to do, Ethan. You've been out to destroy the HOA from the beginning. You and your fake emergency calls won't work." A muscle in my jaw twitched. Behind her, flames were consuming the walls of a home, windows exploding as the fire spread. Even if she was blind, she could feel the heat, hear the destruction. "Karen," I said, barely holding my composure, "if you don't move out of the way, people will die." She tilted her head, considering me like I was an insect beneath her shoe. And then, she pulled something out of her pocket. A strip of nails. Sharp, glinting under the streetlights. Before I could even react, she scattered them onto the road. Gasps erupted from the firefighters in the truck. Ryan cursed loudly beside me. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled. Karen dusted off her hands and gave a satisfied nod. "If you can't drive past, then you won't be able to interfere either." For a second, nobody moved. Then I was grabbing my radio, my pulse hammering as I called in an obstruction of emergency services. The police needed to get here now. Karen didn't even look worried. If anything, she seemed pleased. But her arrogance shattered the moment the distant wail of police sirens broke through the air. A patrol car screeched to a halt beside us, and two officers jumped out. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with an unmistakable air of authority, stormed toward Karen. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Karen actually scoffed. She scoffed. "I'm maintaining order in my neighborhood. These men are harassing me." The officer cut her off. "You are obstructing a fire truck during an active emergency. This is a criminal offense." Karen's smugness faltered. "Oh, don't be ridiculous." She didn't get to finish. The officer pulled out his handcuffs. Karen's face drained of color. No, you can't do this. I'm the HOA president." "You just sabotaged a fire response," the officer said coldly. "People's lives are at stake. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twitched as if reaching for some invisible power she no longer had. "You can't arrest me," she whispered. The officer grabbed her arm, spinning her around. The sharp click of handcuffs snapped through the air. She screamed. Fought. But it didn't matter anymore. As the officers dragged her to the patrol car, I wasted no time. I threw the truck into gear and pushed forward, maneuvering past the scattered nails. But when we arrived at the burning house, my heart plummeted. It was already too late. The moment we stepped out of the truck, I knew we had lost too much time. The fire had swallowed nearly the entire house, flames licking at the collapsing walls as thick, black smoke curled into the sky. The intense heat burned against my skin, even from a distance. My team rushed into action, unrolling hoses, shouting commands, working as fast as humanly possible. But I already knew what was coming. A house this far gone, it wasn't about saving it anymore. It was about containing the destruction, keeping the fire from spreading to the neighboring homes. Still, we pushed forward, dousing the blaze with everything we had. As the flames retreated, leaving behind the smoldering skeleton of what had once been a home, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. The homeowners had escaped, but their entire lives had been reduced to ash. And then, through the haze of smoke, I heard a scream. Not from inside the house, from the crowd. A man shoved past the onlookers, his face ashen, his movements frantic. He staggered toward the police car where Karen was being held, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom?" I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. "Karen's son." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The house that burned down, it was his. The officers barely had time to react before the man, Nathan, lunged toward the car, gripping the edge of the open door as if trying to steady himself against the nightmare unfolding in front of him. His hands trembled. His voice broke. What have you done?" Karen's face, still smug just moments ago, twisted in confusion. "Nathan?" Her son took a step back, shaking his head like he couldn't make sense of the words forming in his mouth. His gaze flickered toward the ruined house, then back to her. His chest rose and fell sharply, like he was struggling to breathe. You blocked the fire truck? You let my house burn?" Karen blinked. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked lost. Genuinely lost. I didn't know it was your house," she stammered. Nathan let out a sharp, humorless laugh, one filled with something close to hysteria. Oh, that makes it better, does it?" His voice cracked, eyes shining with rage and heartbreak. "It wasn't just my house, Mom. Everything I owned, gone. My memories, my photos, my clothes, everything. Because of your stupid HOA games." Karen's hands twitched, her breath hitching as if she was finally starting to grasp the consequences of what she'd done. I was just trying to enforce the rules," she whispered weakly. I didn't mean." Nathan's expression hardened. His chest heaved, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "You didn't mean to?" His voice shook with barely controlled fury. "You didn't mean to? You stood in front of a burning house and stopped the only people who could help. You threw nails on the road. You fought the police. All because you wanted to prove that you're in charge?" Karen flinched, her lips parting like she wanted to argue. But no words came out. For the first time, there was no defense. No excuse. The weight of it finally seemed to crash down on her, and her entire body sagged. Her shoulders trembled, and her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. Nathan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. Like he didn't recognize her anymore. "You're pathetic," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "And I never want to see you again." Karen's eyes widened. "No, Nathan, wait." But he was already gone, disappearing into the night as firefighters continued to hose down the embers of his former home. Karen sat there in the back of the police car, her hands cuffed in her lap, her carefully composed facade crumbling. For the first time, I saw it. Genuine fear. Genuine regret. But it didn't matter. It was too late. Karen sat in the courtroom, her once carefully styled hair now limp, her face drawn with exhaustion. Gone was the bold red lipstick, the tailored blazers, the air of superiority that had once made her larger than life. She looked small now, dwarfed by the reality of what she had done. The judge didn't take long to hand down the verdict. 1 year in prison for obstruction of emergency services and reckless endangerment. It could have been worse, but even this sentence hit her like a death blow. As the ruling echoed through the courtroom, Karen turned, her eyes searching for someone, anyone, who might stand by her. But there was no one. Her son, Nathan, had refused to press charges but hadn't spoken to her since the fire. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. The neighborhood, once under her thumb, had turned its back on her completely. Even the HOA board, the very people she had ruled over like a queen, had removed her from power the moment her arrest made headlines. She had built her identity on control, but now, she had none. Even as she was led away, I knew she still didn't fully understand. She still believed she was the victim in all of this. That the fire, the arrest, the downfall, it was somehow my fault, the fire department's fault, the neighborhood's fault. Never hers. But the truth didn't care about her delusions. Nathan was homeless because of her. Families had nearly lost everything because of her. And the worst part? It had all been preventable. As I stood outside the courthouse, watching as reporters swarmed the scene, I felt no satisfaction, just a grim sense of finality. Karen would serve her time, but she would never truly learn. Some people are incapable of looking in the mirror and seeing what they've become. The HOA, once her weapon of control, was now just another group of people who wanted nothing to do with her. The woman who had spent years making others' lives miserable had isolated herself completely. In the end, Karen didn't just lose her power. She lost everything. And maybe, just maybe, that was the justice she deserved. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA or someone like Karen? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.